And here we are.
Hello, everybody. I'm Debbie Wells, and I'm here with Franklin Hill Perrell from Artful Circle. And also below we have, or depending on where your squares are, I have Jeff Silver, who is our technical consultant, and also the privilege of being my brother. So anyway, we're here for Central Park Part 2. We're very excited. I see that we've got a lot of people registered already, and they'll roll in the next few minutes. I'm going to just let everybody say hello for a minute, and then we'll go right into the presentation. Before we get started, I just want to say that if you notice on your right side, there's a chat box, and somebody just put something in there, and I know who that is, and I'm going to do it too. Just type in a little message just to say you're here. If you want to say, I'm here from New York, Florida, London, Montreal, wherever you're coming from, Connecticut, we'd love to know where you're from. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. Franklin, you want to say hello while I change?
Hi, hello everybody. We have so much fun with this Central Park, and I know that for a lot of us, it's not possible to go there right now, or at least we're not planning on it soon. But Debbie and I have been through the park so many times, and it's such a special experience to be there. And today we're really talking about it in reference to the art that's there and the context of the park. So I know right now that Debbie's going to make a couple of remarks, I think, to tell us about a few of the issues with tech and whatever. I can say one of those. I've learned this, that if you have a tablet or if you're watching this in your phone, there's a time lag. But if you're on the screen on your, something you have at home, something significant, it should be quite good. And what else, Debbie? Did I miss a point? Or
no, that was perfect. The only other things I already said, if you have a tech problem, I've got my cell phone right here, so you can text me. Just text, because we're live and we don't, we all want to keep it simple. You can do that. You can introduce yourself, which I see a lot of people are, and I see some friendly faces and some new people too. All sorts of interesting combinations of people.
Terrific. I appreciate those special highs.
Yes, it's really nice.
Very nice.
Okay, and if you decide for some reason you have to leave, goodbye, Jeffrey. He just signed off for a minute, but he's teching us from a distance. If you do miss it, or you have to leave early, or you have any problems at all, like I see you say you don't have any sound. Jeffrey, can you help her with that?
Yes, I will.
We'll show a replay. Okay, so that's being taken care of. Okay, so I think we're ready to start the presentation. We've got a lot of people here already, and I think we're ready to start. You ready, Franklin?
Absolutely. I can't wait.
Okay, here we go. This is our introduction to the Sculptures of Central Park Part 2, and it didn't matter if you missed Part 1. We have a little bit of a review from it, but it's just a different part of the park.
Good. Now, there it is. That's where we started. That's over at 60th Street and 5th Avenue in front of the Metropolitan Club. And I think that piece is considered by many to be aesthetically the most significant that's connected to Central Park. It was actually part of that plaza, which they call Grand Army Plaza, was part of the original plan. So even though it's not inside the park, it's part of it. And it's also maintained by the Central Park Conservancy. And the artist who did that is Augustus St. Gaudens. Any more about that, Debbie, you think people need to know at this point?
No, I think that's perfect. I also see that somebody, Leslie, wants to know if we have Central Park recoded, and I think she means recorded, and the answer is yes. So we can talk about that later.
Absolutely.
Okay. So just continuing.
So the designers of Central Park, of course, were Calvert. Now I found out something. Calvert Vaux rhymes with rocks. Who knew? R-O-C-K-S, Calvert Vaux, not Vaux or Vaux, Vaux. And Olmsted, from Connecticut, incidentally, was his partner, and Olmsted was previously the superintendent of the park plan. Today you'd call it dealing, because Vaux was a competitor for the competition to design the park. So he thought it was a good idea to hire Olmsted. Good idea, and it worked. Next, Debbie.
Okay. I'm sorry, hold on one sec. Okay, so now we talked about where we Oh, someone just said there was a misspelling.
Oh, yes,
did that on
Olmsted is
purpose
not,
to
it doesn't
make
have an
sure.
A, but we have
Thank
had a
you.
lot going on.
Okay, so this is now the second tour that we're doing. So we did, you can see it says Grand Army Plaza at the bottom. That's where we started last time. And now we're going further north.
Yeah,
So,
just think about if you're walking along Fifth Avenue or Central Park West, there's a transverse, as they call it, around 66th Street. So we are essentially going to be north of that this time. And not much, it's just going to go up to about 72nd, 73rd.
excellent.
And can I say one more thing?
Sure.
A novel feature of the park, and you're going to touch on it later, Debbie, is how most of the roads are curvilinear. And when you see the map like this, you realize the other thing that people don't sense right away, when they come to the park, the first thing people say, "Oh my goodness, what a pleasure! We see what Manhattan used to look like before the buildings were there." Not true. Not true. It was sort of flat, swampy land, and they built it all up with the beautiful landscaping you're going to hear more about in a moment.
I know. I have to agree with you, Franklin. I also thought that this was all natural woods and a natural setting. To know that it was so artificially landscaped, it actually, to me, it makes it more artistic and more creative. It really is an expression. And when we're going to talk about the sculptures, but there's so much more, like you said, about the trails.
I can't resist. I have to say it now because you're going to hear about it later. I never mentioned this before. Great British architect named Capability Brown.
Ooh, that's a good
name. He had the vision to get rid of formal architecture. He introduced the so-called scenic architecture, whereby, well, if there wasn't a beautiful landscape there, you put one in, build a lake, put a mountain up, do whatever you needed to do. So that was what Olmsted was following. So go on.
Someone just asked if your camera is turned off, and I think you're having a bandwidth problem, but you will pop back eventually. Okay, well, we can hear you, and that's the most important part. So you're just going to have to
knock myself off and back on. It may help.
Okay, eventually it'll come back on. But thank you, Bonnie, for pointing that out. Okay, so the one thing I want to talk about before we go talk about Central Park, the area we just discussed, I just wanted to point out there was one building that I just couldn't resist talking about that's right outside of Central Park, right across the street. And that is actually what you're looking at now is the Frick collection, the museum, but now they're expanding on it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what you'll see there. So inside the Frick, which is my favorite museum, I actually took my husband there on a first date, and one of our first dates, and it was one of our most memorable. So these are some of my favorites here, and the Frick has everything. It's got Ang and Rembrandt, Titian, El Greco. You can see it's just a beautiful, beautiful setting. And they're now doing some renovations on it that will make it even more special, including adding a cafe, being able to go up the stairs to see more. It's really going to be beautiful. But what I wanted to point out here was the outside. When you go on to Frick is located on 70th Street and 5th Avenue. And I showed you the 5th Ave. This is the 5th Avenue side. But when you go into the entrance, you go onto the 70th Street side. And on 70th Street, that brown door is the door that you walk through, the wooden door, to buy your ticket for admission. And if you look over on the pediment above, the arch pediment, there is a nude statue. And now this is where it gets interesting. That nude statue is actually modeled from a real person, and her name was Audrey Munson, and they called her America's first supermodel. That's what she looked like in real life on the side there, that photograph. But she posed for a lot of famous statues. One that's not even in the park is the top of the municipal building downtown by City Hall. It has like a fairy tale top on that building, and there's a gold statue on the top, and that gold statue is called Civic Fame, and it's Audrey Munson. She has about 12 sculptures all throughout New York City. the ones that are in Central Park that she was the model for are two that one of them we actually discussed in Central Park 1. It's the Pomona statue at the Pulitzer Fountain at Grand Army Plaza, which was right across from the Sherman statue that Franklin mentioned before. Another one is at the Merchants Gate, which is on the west side of Central Park. So now we'll get back into Central Park, but I just wanted to show this little tidbit because I'm obsessed with Audrey Munson now. And Barbara said she enjoyed our first tour, and I thank you. And now here's the beginning of what we're doing on Central Park 2. Franklin, you want to talk about Christopher Columbus at the beginning of literary?
Well, I think that one of the things that comes up with the statuary that you're going to see around 66th Street is you're going to realize something started around 1900. Even before, of course, 1892, and that is New York's ethnic communities were increasingly gaining recognition. And this, by the way, was funded by the New York Biographical and Genealogical Society. And the idea behind it was there were so many Italian Americans coming into New York that the elite who were running the park felt something be done to create a statement of inclusion for Italian Americans, and this was the way to do it.
Wonderful. So this is the Christopher Columbus statue, and actually, someone asked what the ball and the little rope is. We think that is
it has to do with his nautical career, his career as an admiral, a captain, and everything.
Which makes sense for Christopher Columbus. Now, the interesting thing about Columbus is he's at the beginning of what they call literary walk. And literary walk is, I think Franklin mentioned that all the trails are very curved. Literary walk is the only straight line in Central Park. So this is at the beginning of this literary walk. It's called literary walk, but Christopher Columbus, for some reason, is at the beginning of it, even though he, he's not a literary icon. Again, someone asked about his camera. It's a technical problem. He will bounce back at some point, but his voice is there, so
I'm still with you.
Okay. So anyway, so just continuing on. This is the sculptor for the Christopher Columbus statue.
And incidentally, it's in Madrid, and it's a bronze. And bronze casting enables a sculptor to make numerous reiterations of the same piece. Go on, Debbie.
Okay, so the literary walk, as I mentioned, is straight. And you can see that this is a very good picture showing that it's straight, it's flat, and you'll also notice that it's got two different rows of elm trees. You can see on one side there's 2 rows, the other side there's 2 rows. And I'll talk about that more about that in a second. What I'm showing here is that, can you see the way the trees are sort of forming a canopy? At different times of year it looks different, but this gives you the idea of the canopy, and what they call it is an LA.
And there's another feature of that, Debbie, is over there they talk about that quality as cathedraling, so that the arches are like a Gothic cathedral.
Oh, absolutely. And here I have other examples of different kinds of LAs. They don't all have that cathedral archway, as you said, but here are a few more. Basically, the idea of it is to have a promenade that goes straight, and you've got like a perspective that leads you to something. So in the cases of these ones I have here, you've got like the first one on top is at Versailles, and the trees are leading you to that beautiful building, Petit Trianon. And the other one at the bottom on the left is Jack Larson, which is a reserve on Long Island, and that one's a little different because it's plants. The red azaleas are plants, but you can see the red poles were artificially put there, and it all adds to that perspective. The other two, you can see the Longwood Gardens one, which is one of my favorite places, has a temple structure that the plants are leading to. And the one in the middle is outside of Paris, and That one has a little bit more of a medieval fairy tale look, because it actually was restored recently from a 16th century ancient road.
Yeah, Debbie, somebody asked a question, what street
Mhm.
does the literary walk parallel? So, I mean, it's the north and south, so you've got Central Park, West Fifth Avenue, but I think you mean where does it start and where does it end? So I would say 66th, 67th,
Oh,
up
you're
to
back.
about
The picture is back.
up to about 72nd, thereabouts. Oh, and the American Elm, you've got
Yes.
just in the nick of time. They call, talk about things, current events, etc. Do you know that they called the disease that killed the American elms, they called it Dutch elm disease?
That's right.
Why? A Dutch scientist discovered the contagion. So he had the honor of having his country associated with this killer of elm trees. There are very few American elms. Almost every street in America had an allée, or it had street plantings of American elms, but there were only two important major groves left, and that's the elms inside Central Park along the Literary Walk, and the elms that are on Fifth Avenue, then roughly around the same spot. And what they do in the park, Dutch elm disease is a fungus. It gets into the bark and all of that, and it can wipe. Generally, elm trees, you may get an American elm, but they usually don't live past the point they get to be about 18 feet high. These are 50 to 100 feet, so they're fully mature. What they do is the arborists in the park continuously keep an eye on it. They see if a leaf is turning yellow, if they see an area is turning yellow, and they cut the branches down 15 feet away from where the disease starts. So these have been maintained. And the reason they never caught it is because they're isolated on Manhattan Island, where there are no other elm trees within a couple of miles. And if some of those germs blow over, it's not so enormous in terms of the amount that they can't remediate it, but they have to actually watch it constantly.
It is interesting. This is a perfect example of how nature and art are combining into this artificial world that Central Park is. Okay, anyway, continuing on. Now we're really getting to Literary Walk itself.
Right. Well, of course, who could be more literary than William Shakespeare? And we take him for granted. Incidentally, in the 19th century, most American people were educated by reading the Bible and reading Shakespeare. And if you owned two books, it had to be the collected works of Shakespeare plus the Bible. Now, Shakespeare performances in an era before movies, every village, every town would be hoping for Shakespeare. There's a scene in Huck Finn where itinerant actors stage a scene from Hamlet. Everybody was interested in this. But the statue has a fascinating story as really the first of these literary creations. And I think that if you jump ahead a little bit, Debbie, go to the next one. Get past this, because I'm still on the story of how did it come about. The biggest actor in the 19th century was Edwin Booth, up there on the left. And Edwin Booth was the leading interpreter of Shakespeare. There was an interest in doing a Shakespeare statue in the park, as the park had been established in 1853, and now about 10 years later, 1863, 1864, the actors decided to raise money to start a statue. And Edwin Booth was always interested in enhancing the status of actors. We'll get to that in a moment. But he had a brother who turns out these days to be more famous, actually infamous, actually notorious, and that was John Wilkes Booth. And they were opposites. Edwin Booth was very, very well adjusted. He was, as it turns out, an abolitionist. He was a supporter of Abraham Lincoln. And he didn't approve of his brother's attitude. I guess John Wilkes Booth tried to portray the notion he was a Southern gentleman and all of that. So he took on those airs and was pro-Confederate. Well, when Edwin Booth and he got into a political fight, he threw him out of the house. But this was after the two of them had starred in Julius Caesar and they raised the $4,000, which were sufficient to begin the statue that you see there. And the house that Edwin threw John Wilkes Booth out of happens today to be the Players Club, of which you see an image on the left.
That is in the Gramercy Park area.
Yeah, it's 19 East 20th, which means Gramercy Park. I guess it's south. And then up in the middle is Booth's bedroom, which is maintained. And Booth left the house to become a private club for actors.
Right. I remember being at the Players Club with you, Franklin, and I think you have to ask if you can have permission to see the room. And it's perfectly preserved. This is just a small picture of it. It's actually a very large room with a lot of different, it's almost like a little studio apartment they set it up like. It's really very...
Well, that's why he moved into it after he gave up the rest of the house. It continued to be a club, or it became a club, and he was a member of the club and the founder of the club, and he lived up above it. In the top floor of the house he gave to the club.
It's beautifully preserved. And actually someone had asked last time, and they are correct, that I think about 2 or 3 doors down is Theodore Roosevelt's birthplace.
It's on 1 block west.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, and we'll just go back for a second. We skipped this before. When Franklin and I were at Central Park with a group, this was a while ago, we actually saw them maintaining some of the statuary, and you can see these are people hard at work. In this case, they were blowtorching it.
Well, you know what they're doing, Debbie?
What are they?
They're not, the thing didn't break up or anything that it has to be welded back together. What they're using the blowtorch for is that the oxidation and dirt and all of that on the piece needed to be cleaned up, and they had to restore patina. So you always heat with bronze, you hit it with chemicals, hit it with a blowtorch. That's a typical way of enhancing or creating patina.
Right. I love that green color of the patina. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, just a little bit about the sculptor, John
Quincy Adams Ward, did the Pilgrim in Central Park, George Washington at Federal Hall. Who knows what's going to happen with that? And he also, on the subject of paradox, integrity protecting the works of man, which is the pediment of the New York Stock Exchange. Next, Debbie.
It's interesting how all these things are going to combine, because the stock exchange is going to come up again later in the lecture.
There's a lot of overlap.
What's happening this time period? Okay, so now
again back to ethnic New York. Who knew that the Scottish people had a problem with self-image? But they did, and the Scots were in New York, along with the Irish and along with the Brits and who had followed the Dutch. But the Scots were needful of some support. So Sir Walter Scott was the top novelist. He was the person who founded the idea of the historic novel. Ivanhoe was a good example of one of them. And there was a Scottish group known as the Caledonian Society. It's still around. And they funded the beginning of this statue. And there's another one coming. And the other organization, the St. Andrew's Society, a few years later, funded the image of Robert Burns, who incidentally is shown seated on a plow. Burns was a farmer, a tenant farmer, very poor. He was a master of Scottish dialect. And he's also looking up into the sky. And the story behind this is that he lost his fiancée. They were engaged as teenagers, and he never fell in love again. And he's looking up into the heavens to experience contact with her, at least spiritually.
This is just one of the many sculptures that have a little romantic tinge to them. There's a lot going on behind these statues when you hear the story.
Absolutely. And here's Sir John Steele, who was a Scot. And he was patronized by Queen Victoria. And if you know much about Queen Victoria, she loved to put on Scottish garb. She'd love to go to Balmoral. She loved everything Scottish. So he was in a way her pet as an artist. Next.
Okay, now we have a statue of the only American poet on Literary Walk, and this is Fitzgreen Halleck. Oh, somebody just asked if Burns wrote Auld Lang Syne.
Yes, he did. He did, and he wrote quite about 5 or 6 in the greatest hits of anything Scottish. That being the top. Go on, Debbie.
This is what I love about the chat. We're all interacting. It's just amazing. Okay, so anyway, again, we have the sculpture there, and he's seated in the chair similar to the photograph. And above, we also caught them maintaining that one too while we happened to be there. It was a very busy day that day. So a little bit about Halleck. He was also known as the American Byron. And Edgar Allan Poe, by the way, wrote something I thought really nice about him, saying, "No name in American poetical world is more firmly established than that of Fitzgreen."
Incidentally, Poe was actually expressing some antagonism and jealousy because why not him? Who's Fitzgreen Halleck? And this is what he was really saying.
But ironically, that is true. But ironically, I think more people know who Edgar Allan Poe is.
That's the whole point. You know, the whole thing changed. Halleck was the big name back in the day, and now who remembers him until we see the statue in the park?
That's true, and that's what's interesting because Halleck was actually part of a group of also all names that you would recognize: Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, William Cullen Bryant, and this was a literary group, and he was a big part of it.
And all three giants in their day,
mm-hmm.
and much less recognized today, except for scholars of Victorian American literature.
Right. And what's interesting is that William Cullen Bryant, whose house, that's the house that he lived in Roslyn, which Franklin and I were a little bit involved in its restoration. But it was William Cullen Bryant that actually commissioned the sculpture for Halleck. Just a little bit about Halleck so you can know who he is, since I don't think he's a well-known name at all. He actually was known for something called the Croker Papers, which he had written with somebody named Joseph Rodman Drake, another person who I think most people had never heard of. Drake, he was young. He got married at 25 years old, and he married this woman Sarah, who you see her picture. You see she's wearing glasses. She must have been a wealthier woman. Anyway, so they married, and Halleck was not happy about this, and he wrote. You can see the quote that he wrote at the bottom, and which is filled with animosity. He said, "Drake offered himself a sacrifice at the shrine of Hymen to shun the pains and penalties of poverty. I officiate as groomsman, though much against my will, and he is perhaps the handsomest man in New York, with a face like an angel and a form like Apollo." I think without us asking him any questions, I think it's very obvious, as people are saying in the chat, that I think he had homosexual tendencies, and obviously
at a minimum
could not express it as well as he would have liked to have. So regardless, that was his love life. He never married. He later moved, much later in his life, he moved in with his sister in Connecticut. And at the bottom here, I have a picture below the pictures, it says later when he moved to Connecticut with his sister, this is how he died. Now, this is a poet, I would say. He said, "Marie," his sister, "hand me my pantaloons, if you please." And then he died. And that was it. But
and Debbie, I wanted to mention, you have a thing there above. John Jacob Astor was the richest man in America. He was the Jeff Bezos of his day.
Yes.
And he was also known to be very cheap. So when he died, he left Halleck, whom he'd hired as his private librarian, left him $250. And the son said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. We've got to give him $1,500 a year." So,
yes, I have that written there. And I think that's a really great story, right, for the richest man in the world to do that.
And by the way, someone Lynn asked about, is Knickerbocker a Dutch name? It was, you hear the word Knickerbocker, largely, it is a real family. There are people named Knickerbocker, but it was popularized as a sort of a catchword symbolizing old New York by Washington Irving, who did a series of Knickerbocker tales, meaning tales of old New York. So it's Dutch in spirit, if not in fact.
Just to prove to everybody that Halleck was more of a household name at the time, this is an illustration which I was so lucky to come across of the actual dedication ceremony of the statue. So you can see the statue right there. And
no social distancing in that.
no.
And I think they established some regulations not to have that many people as a result of the crowding. So imagine, Halleck was like a rock star. Can you, and who's heard of him now, except all of you?
Right. It's so interesting. Now, here's another interesting fact. Across from Fitzgreen Halleck, this is actually a rendering. The statue that you're seeing, it's not really there yet. It was supposed to be there in August, but it's I guess because of COVID and all of that, it got delayed. Now they're hoping for the fall. But this is a rendering of a sculpture that is going to be there. This will be on Literary Walk, although there really isn't really much of a literary, it's not the same kind of literary as the rest of the people, but this seemed like a good spot, I suppose, for them to put this statue. Now, this statue is the rendering of Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Sojourner Truth statue. So it's these three women. Now, the reason I show you the photographs of the three of them on the top, you see the two ladies, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, are sitting at a table together. The reason that they're sitting at a table is because they knew each other and they worked together. The other one, Sojourner Truth, she's alone because this trio is composed by the artist. They didn't interact with each other. It's all part of women power. It's all part of, the racial issues that are going on. So this is more symbolic than a scene of what really happened, which made it a little controversial. Here is a close-up of it. This is the mold. So here I'm just going to explain this composition, which I think is very imaginative and very interesting. So here you've got Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth is speaking, and she's talking, and they're listening to her speaking. So she's in that mode of giving information. So what she's most known for is a speech that she did called "Ain't I a Woman?" Google it. It's a very, very interesting speech where she basically says, aren't I a human just like everyone else? Aren't I a woman just like all the other women? So from her point of view, very, very interesting. So now you've got Elizabeth B. Anthony is organizing. She's coordinating things. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who is another suffragette, not quite as famous as Susan B. Anthony, is writing. So the three of them are discussing the issues of women's rights and the right to vote, and the amendment that was just it's now their anniversary of the amendment for women to vote. So these three figures are sharing a conversation. They're sharing the pedestal. If you look here, they're all together. So it's interesting that they're doing this instead of honoring one man. They're doing the three women together as a team. So, and in this case, they're sitting at an indoor table, and there actually is some meaning to that, because at the time when women were doing these kinds of projects and working on these kinds of things, they were doing it in the privacy of homes. They weren't out in public doing it. So I think that's a very nice way of showing how these women should be celebrated. The artist's name is Meredith Bergman. There's a picture of her. And they called that sculpture the breaking of the bronze ceiling, which I think is a nice play on words of women being recognized in statuary, including in Central Park. So these are the first real women, not imaginary women or literary women. Like, I'm not talking about Alice in Wonderland and people like that. These are three real women who are being honored. Another sculpture that she's known for, which is similar in some ways, is in Boston. And here you have Abigail Adams, a former slave, Phyllis Wheatley, and Speaker Lucy Stone, abolitionist speaker. And here it's like a little deconstructed. You've got all of these three women, a trio again. And again, they're not up on traditional pedestals. They're leaning on their pedestals, and they're using them, but it's not quite the same. And the pedestals all have their words on it. And again, these are more interactive, like some of the other sculptures that we've seen in Central Park, but not on Literary Walk, where those sculptures are on giant pedestals and they're behind fencing by the trees. Here you can get up and interact with them in a very different way. So I think this is a very nice modern addition to the park. So look out for it in the next few months. Hopefully you'll
So,
be there.
so here, and I think the other point as you made about the pedestal, sort of like installation art, and the other feature of it is there are three men nearby that you've seen: Halleck, Scott, and Burns. Now, when you get up towards the band shell, and it's no accident that near there are some musicians, and Ludwig van Beethoven, of course, is beyond a superstar, and it would be natural he would be there. And he came into it because German Americans were looking for a hero. And I think you have something about the artist next, Debbie. Yeah, and who did that lovely little cherub on the Puck building, and he was a German American, so he was a natural choice for a German American society. And they were actually responsible for a few others. There's one of the scientist Humboldt is near there, and I think we have Schiller coming up, Debbie. Let's have a look at Schiller. Schiller, and here I have to give you my musical rendition. Freude, schöne Gatter, Funken, Takte, aus Elysium, and I could go on with that. But that is the Ode to Joy, which is in the Ninth Symphony, and it was written by Schiller, who was one of the Romantic movement. And incidentally, Romanticism comes before Classicism in this instance, or rather after, and Beethoven is regarded as a transitional figure between those two movements. So it's very apt he was interested in Schiller as he became increasingly more romantic as his career went on. Debbie,
these two German sculptures that we're seeing just off of Literary Walk, they're much more modest than the other ones. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Well, they're getting a little bit later in time, a little less grandiose, and they wanted more rather than bigger. So there are three. So next. Good.
Okay. Are we ready
almost
for...
About on time, Debbie. Almost.
Perfect. I know. I just looked at our timing too. We're doing great. Okay. So now we're arriving at Bethesda Terrace. There's so much going on at Bethesda Terrace. This is a plaque that explains the different sections of it. But do you want to say anything about the plaque, Franklin, before we move on?
The plaque. No. I think the main thing about it, without looking at belaboring the plaque, is that the Bethesda Terrace was envisioned from the day one. Let's have a look at it. Envisioned from day one as a focal point in the park, and it's the most spectacular architectural element in the park. And I forgot to tell you that Vox was the architect of the hardscape. If you've ever hired landscape architects, you know hardscape is anything made out of masonry. And your landscape, the horticulture and arboristic features of it, were the product of Olmsted. And this was meant to be something like the Trevi Fountain or whatever. It was meant to be an arcade. It was meant to be very neoclassical, very Renaissance, and it accomplishes all of that. And it was meant to be the focal point of gatherings and sort of a procession that would happen.
Actually,
as part of the park day.
We were talking about Literary Walk before, and if you see the two trees in the middle, that's basically where you'd be coming from.
Right, and you can see the walk right in the middle, and you can see the alley.
That's right. So before we continue, I love when you talk about this. When you talk about the wealthier people would stop at Literary Walk in their carriage, and what would they do on their way to Bethesda Terrace?
They would get out and walk, because the elites back in the days had the notion that it would be unhealthy, it would be unreasonable, it would be unseemly to avoid contact with rank and file people. So although the whole idea of parade, the equivalent of showing up in a Maybach or a Bentley or something like that, was meaningful, and that he could blow air to each other the way one would on Madison Avenue or Worth Avenue, and see who was there and nod to each other and all of that. If that was all they did, it would be unseemly. So they had to get out and commingle, and then they'd hop back in. And what the driver would drop them off on the south end of the walk, and then there was a place to meet after they went through the Bethesda Terrace, and then they got out and the board left.
Okay, well, anyway, so let's go into Bethesda Terrace. This is actually during construction.
Yes. Yes, and it's very pure then. We see it there, a lot of the surrounding foliage. So you see the structure very clearly.
You can also see how wide the steps are, and I think the whole thing was to accommodate a lot of people. It was a gathering place, and you'll see even more when we get closer to the fountain, which is just right across the way. Franklin, you want to talk a little bit about some of the architecture and sculpture?
Well, there were two Brits involved. Jacob Ray Mould worked for Vox. Vox was British trained. Also, he was recruited actually by Andrew Jackson Downing, who had come to Britain, who was American Gothic architect. And Mould was right in following that. But he was a big name already in Britain because he'd done the Crystal Palace for Prince Albert. And he ended up doing the Belvedere Castle, which is something, if we ever do a part 3 of this, we have to get up to the Belvedere Castle. And he's also very responsible for the imagery of the carvings that are replete throughout the Bethesda Terrace. And we see there some creature that looks a little bit like a dragon. But do you have a close-up of any other carvings? I'll save it for that. Let's see if we have one. Yeah, and that's, by the way, that's Mould right there. So he was a bit of a dandy. And as you know, he's there probably about 1869, 18, you know, in there at that point, right around the Civil War. And the imagery, you see an owl, you see a crescent moon and an open book, and you see what looks like, well, it sort of looks like a chicken waking up, but the idea is night and day. So he has animals that are symbolic of the night, has things that are symbolic with the moon in that configuration, presumably the night, and then the cock crows, greeting the morning is what you're seeing on the right, and then there's a scene up in the edge of the area around the bridge with fruit and there are birds, and one can go through this and just get a whole iconography of seasons and times of day. And with all Mould's vision.
So now, if you go, those two giant staircases that we talked about before, if you go on either side of it, you go down, this is what's underneath the steps, in between the steps.
Now, you know, Minton is British, and I was brought up eating on Minton ironstone. They're just sort of, you know, dinnerware. And they're a great ceramic factory, and they're specialists in creating what's known as encaustic tiles. And anybody who's had, I don't know whether they call them loaf cakes or whatever, but they're cakes that they make. They're typically box-like, and they might have layers and various other configurations within them. And let's say we could have one done as a checkerboard, and you slice in it, and that design gets repeated. That's the way they manufacture these tiles. Let's just say you rolled up coils of clay as a rod. You made something like the shape of a baluster that would be rectangular, and you built these up into a design that could be sliced, and every slice would have the design repeated. So that's encaustic, and it's the biggest collection, I guess, in the world, 15,000. They're made out of ceramic, meaning clay dug up from the ground and tinted in various ways, the way clay is rendered blue, red, yellow. You can do that with dyes and so on. Encaustic, it's called.
Yes, encaustic.
I
see Bonnie asking those questions. Okay, and another example, that you can see those same Minton tiles in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
It's like very much a 19th century thing. They had books on grammar of Orton and Jones, did all of that. And they were really taken from that. Now, I love the fact that something had been incomplete. Her name is Mangiordano, I think, the artist who did those interior pieces. She was a set designer for Zeffirelli. She's from Milan, from Bergamo. Actually, her family palazzo is in Bergamo, but she's from Milan. And the imagery there is all painted in trompe-l'oeil on marble.
So what you're saying is they took the Minton tile look and they duplicated it. All the incomplete.
And also added some figural paintings as well. You know, so kind of things you would imagine done on the wall in Pompeii and so on. There are a few that have figures in them.
And I like the way they actually look a little worn. Like, I think that adds to the charm of it.
Well, it's sort of like a faux, a faux technique to suggest they were around they have cracks in that are all painted on.
I remember
they painted very recently, I think in the 80s or 90s.
Yes, it's given that faux
It
look.
looks like it's been there hundreds of years, but it hasn't.
Now I remember, Franklin, when we were there and we were looking just about in this spot. I remember they were doing some fashion shoots and it was really fun to watch. And then I found out that Ralph Lauren had his 50th anniversary celebration there. They, you can see Bethesda fountain in the background, which is straight ahead. But you see the picture at the bottom. That's where the Minton tiles are. They added in these cushions to make rows for the fashion show, and they had dinner by Bethesda Terrace. It was really something. They had a whole multimedia thing. If you look, you can watch videos online. If you look up Ralph Lauren's 50th anniversary celebration, and it was a whole extravaganza. And what a place for a party! I think that is perfect. So now back to these wide stairs that we were talking about. So right on the other side underneath would be the tiles that we were just talking about. And this is when we were doing a tour. I think Franklin is way in the front there. We're walking towards Bethesda Fountain. So here now you're seeing Bethesda Fountain closer up, and this is the main centerpiece of the whole thing, and it's got a beautiful history. The fountain is called Bethesda Fountain. The statue straight ahead, the top of it's called Angel of the Waters, and we're going to go through that. So this is a close-up of the angels, the angel, and it supposedly had healing powers. First of all, just to give you an idea of the size, she's 8 feet tall. I think the whole thing is about 26 feet tall. You can see she's only a small part of it. About 1/3 actually, and she's made of bronze. She is carrying a lily in her hand, and that represents purity. The other hand, she is like, you can see she's in the position of blessing the fountain, and there's a whole spiritual background to this statue, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. First of all, it's got 4 cherubs. This is now the second layer of the statue of the angels on the top. Now you've got the 4 cherubs, and you see a little angle of them. It looks really beautiful when you have the water going through the fountain. It's not always on. Anyway, so each of the cherubs, one is temperance, one is purity, one is health, and one is peace. And you can see there's a whole spiritual, allegorical feel to this whole monument. The reason that it has that spiritual feel with all the water and all of that is because the artist Emma Stebbins, who I'll talk about in a moment, she actually designed this as a testament to comparing the new water that they were getting from the Croton Aqueduct. In 1842, they had all sorts of diseases going on in New York, like cholera and things like that. And when they had the aqueduct put together, the water was flowing into New York, and it was a healing thing for the people of New York. So she's using that thing that was going on in their time period and comparing it to an ancient story where Jesus heals a paralyzed man at the Bethesda pool in Jerusalem. It's all part of the Gospel of John story. So you can see there's a lot going on here in terms of the meaning that the artist put into the statue. And to talk a little bit about the artist, her name was Emma Stebbins, and she was the first sculptor and first woman to receive a commission for public art. This was in 1859. Here I have a quote from an author that wrote about women artists of all ages. Is the name of the book. And she describes Emma Stebbins, I thought, very nicely. She said, "Few lady artists of this country have been surrounded with circumstances more favorable to the development of genius." Stebbins had a nice life. Her childhood, she was supported by her family. She, attained culture and taste. Oops, sorry about that. And she had a lot of encouragement. She actually left America when she was a young adult, and she went to Rome, which was popular for people to do at that time, to go from America to go to Italy to learn how to do formal sculpture. So she goes there and she gets involved in this whole group of people that's what they're all doing. They're studying together, all these creative people. There she meets Charlotte Cushman. Did you know about Charlotte Cushman, Franklin?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
She was one of the most famous actresses of the day.
Yes.
And they're part of a big sort of a gay circle in Rome as an expatriate.
Yes, it was very interesting because I actually found some shots from her theatrical accomplishments. So that picture at the left is her posing for just a shot as an actress, and the other two, one of them she's portraying Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, and the other one I forgot it was some other Shakespearean play where she's playing some sort of like old witch or something. So you can see she was very diversified actress, very famous. She was internationally known. Sorry about that. And as Franklin said, she and Emma were involved in a lesbian circle, and they call themselves jolly girl bachelors. Also, what they called themselves, also this kind of relationship that they had. Obviously, at that time they couldn't legally get married, but they did live together, and they lived together romantically, in a husband and wife way. And that kind of relationship at the time was called a Boston marriage, which I had never heard of before. But what a Boston marriage is at that time when you had two women who were wealthy and successful, like these two women were, they had a fairly open relationship, but they weren't really married. So that's what they called it, a Boston marriage. Now, I said she was a privileged woman, Emma. She didn't get that commission to do the Angel of the Waters by accident. Her brother was in charge of the Central Park Commission for assigning these projects. And he, as I said, I told you the New York Stock Exchange would come back again. He was the president of the New York Stock Exchange. He was the Commodore of the New York Yacht Club. He was a U.S. congressman. He pulled strings for her. She
delivered.
I'm sorry?
He delivered.
He delivered. Although, unfortunately, she did have a little hard time when Charlotte Cushman actually had breast cancer, and she basically dedicated a big portion of her life to helping Charlotte, through her illness. Just about Bethesda Terrace and saying how famous it is. Here I found some TVs and movies about, it's just such a beautiful spot that you can see it's a great place for a party or for a movie shoot. And here you have Kramer and Kramer at riding a bike and literary walk, all different movies here. You can see the fountain and some of the architecture there. So next time you see one of these famous movies, there are many more. You'll recognize the setting. Okay, you ready for Hans Christian Andersen, Franklin?
Oh, absolutely. Again, now there's another ethnic group. And by the way, do you see me? Am I visible at this point?
No, you're still not visible.
All right, I'm going to turn it off and turn it on. Maybe that sometimes helps.
Okay. Having your voice is very important.
Well, my voice, at least we have the voice. So in any event, a Danish baroness in New York got the whole thing going, and there was a group of Danish American women, and they had the idea that who was their most beloved author and well-known in the U.S., Hans Christian Andersen. And of course, he wrote the Ugly Duckling story, and the comment, I think one of the lines in the book is that if you are born into the nest of ducks and you're brought up with ducks, it's not really a problem if you're actually a swan. So the whole idea of the duckling is he's in there sort of by way of a mix-up, and he grows up and discovers he's not a duck, but he becomes a beautiful swan. So I think that's a little mean to the ducks to say that, but that was the idea that he'd improved his status in that particular respect. And the idea is children would be inspired to think that if they had challenges in their earliest days, that the passage of time would afford them greater gifts. So it's a lovely, lovely tale.
Isn't this statue, the little statue of the duck, didn't go missing
Yeah,
for
it
a
was
while?
stolen. It was stolen, but they found it back in the
It,
70s.
it's perfect in that spot. And if you notice, we've made comments sometimes about how things are on big pedestals, little pedestals, and fountains, and so on. And here in the statue you're going to see after this, they're encouraging interactivity.
Well,
They're encouraging
yeah, and
children.
you're also in the most northernmost spot that we're really talking about in this, which is the model boat basin. And if you're coming off of the Bethesda Terrace, you're passing. I think you're near the Boathouse restaurant, and then you encounter this through that way. But if you're in the model boat basin, you're sort of looking at it at the west end.
So we'll talk about just a little bit about Hans Christian Andersen himself. You can see all the beautiful fairy tales.
Things we really take for granted as really standard fare that I don't know if children today know them all. We all did, a few years back.
I bet they do. I know like The Little Mermaid was a Disney movie,
Right.
So I'm sure they know that one. A little bit about the sculptor.
Again, Danish American, and he's responsible for that. That's around. Is that near Times Square?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Appropriately so.
Good. George and Cohen.
Hans Christian Andersen is a favorite of mine because I remember this movie with Danny Kaye, and I loved every song from it. So if you want to remember all the fairy tales, this is a really fun movie to watch. And I couldn't resist having this one, Franklin, just showing the interactivity.
Oh,
You're really reading that book.
And I had the text in there, and I hadn't memorized it, so I was telling some people about it, looked at it, and read it.
And you can see he's a little larger than life in comparison to a real person. Okay, the next statue is one also that you can climb around, and also it gets worn out from all the children, jumping around on it.
And we're looking at the back end here of the rabbit. I think one of the things the original illustrator, whom you have an image of, Johnson Neal, had the notion of dressing up animals in human clothing, and he really popularized. You see that in Beatrix Potter and he was the one who really started.
We have some great pictures of that towards the end. Here is the plaque, and you can see that it was presented by George and Margarita Delacourt.
And let's remember that they did the Delacourt fountain, which we covered in part 1, which is in the zoo.
Oh, you mean the
Delacourt funded that.
Right.
The clock, forgive me.
Exactly. Okay. And here is a close-up of it. You can see it's a very whimsical scene, perfect for climbing. All along the edges, here you can see.
The Mad Hatter on the right, Alice is off the middle, the rabbit is off to the left, the dormouse is in there, etc.
And the crazy mushrooms, and they're having a little tea party. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. Along the edges is the prose from the Jabberwocky, which was written by Lewis Carroll. So a little bit about Tweedledee and Tweedledum here, but it goes all across the perimeter. You want to talk a little bit about the artist and who?
Jose de Creft is terrific. In art today, they tend to minimize in esteem the artists who don't especially innovate. If you don't found something like Cubism or some other new idiom, and you're not participatory in these avant-garde things, you don't get really the high marks. And Jose de Creft, in a sense, falls into that. He's a romanticist sculptor. He's a realist. He's excellent, especially doing animals and things of that nature in portraiture. And I had met him, very elderly man back in the 80s. He must have been about 100. And his work is in the Metropolitan Museum and all sorts of places, but not a big name. But I think where his biggest exposure is right there. And then his wife, Laurie Goulet, over there is on the left, has gotten a lot of play in the past 4 or 5 decades. And she was, I would say, she had to be 60 years younger than he was, because she's still around now. And, I don't want to say she's exactly my contemporary, she's a little older, but and there's the daughter, in the middle who posed for Alice, and you can see, and that's you like her art, Debbie, don't you?
I do. I do. It's a mixed media paper art, and the one on the top, the one that has all the colorful circled layers, are all different kinds of paper, but it's inside an acorn. I just think it's kind of neat.
Yeah, very handmade paper. You can do all sorts of tinting that and so on. And then there's Jose de Kreft and the daughter, and showing her similarity to the sculpture.
You can actually see a little resemblance there.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And
I think this one is hysterical because this is George Delacorte himself, and you can see the Mad Hatter. The artist used his caricature to make his face. You could see it really looks like him.
He had no problem with it, though.
Well, I think you have to have a good sense of humor.
Well, he's that type of person. So let's see what's next.
Okay, a little bit about Lewis Carroll, the Alice in Wonderland.
Right. Lewis Carroll was a cleric, meaning he was part of the Catholic Church. The father of Alice Liddell was a dean. Actually, they were all out of Oxford, and the family knew each other. And Lewis Carroll was a bachelor, and he had no children of his own, and he, in a sense, sort of delegated to the children because he was a good storyteller, and he made up the story of Alice in Wonderland to entertain young Alice, who incidentally grew up to be an extremely rich and prominent woman living in a grand British country house, lived to the age of about 90, and with all that said about the whole story today, she apparently had no problems whatsoever. And any recollection she had of the author were all very favorable. So
here, just ending it up, we have those illustrations that you were talking about that I think are very recognizable to most people.
They have a certain Victorian charm because of the line work, because of the way they're colored. Looking at early examples of world famous lithography, which was called, ink on stones, which were innovated in the 19th century, first in Britain and then in France, and made famous by Toulouse-Lautrec. I did that using 3 or 4 plates of different colors and give them those tints. And Sir John Tenniel was the first artist, meaning illustrator, caricature artist, who was knighted. Queen Victoria, and he was an illustrator for the British Punch. There's an American Punch and the British, and he was on the illustration staff of the British. And it's the Punch. I don't know if it's exactly still around, but I had a subscription to it back in the 70s and 80s, so it certainly had a long run.
Well, Lynn Mazer I think she's signing off, and we're actually about to sign off ourselves.
We did it in a timely way, Debbie. Congratulations.
Perfect. So I just wanted to say, if this is the time where we're going to end in a moment, if anybody has any questions, just type them in and we'll answer. In the meantime, we'll wait for that for a moment. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say that we may have 1 or 2 more of these coming up for the summer. But other than that, we will be starting a fall schedule soon, and just stay tuned for everything. We hopefully you're getting your fun facts through our email. If you don't already, please send us your email, and you will. Everyone's saying thank you. Someone asked if you can see Central Park 1, and yes, if you send me an email, I can send you the a recording of it. Please recommend us to everyone. Franklin, you want to sign off by saying anything?
I just love, I'm sorry you can't see my face because you would just, you don't see that I'm smiling and very happy with the way things have gone with these. And I just love, instead of working on ordering more bandwidth, so we'll get fixed. I guess that's why this is free at this point, because we're still figuring it out. But by the time we're up and running properly, we'll have everything working beautifully.
Well, I also want to thank Jeffrey Silver, who just popped back on again, who I mentioned is my brother, but also a tech genius. And he has a company called Silver Bridge Solutions. So if you want to know how we went about doing this or need any other computer advice, he's the one to call.
And sorry we couldn't fix Franklin's bandwidth.
That's nothing to do with Jeff and Debbie. It's domestic problems out
vision.
here in the remote regions of Eastern Long Island.
Well, this is what happens, when people signed in, you could see where people are coming from. And I think it's just amazing. I'm in one part of Long Island. My brother is in New Jersey. Franklin is in the East End of Long Island. We've had people from London, Montreal, California, Connecticut, Florida. It's really quite amazing that we can do this. So we're thrilled. Oh, and Franklin, you're back. Oh, and he just disappeared again.
Yeah, I should be back again. Am I back now?
Yes, you are.
Good.
And I got all your messages, and I will send whoever asks, I will send them a replay of this one, of Central Park 1. Central Park 2, the one you just saw, what would you say, Jeff? Within about 5-10 minutes, you're going to get an email that says, thank you for coming. Or if somebody missed it, it'll say, sorry you missed it, and you'll get a replay. That replay will not be available forever, so watch it quickly.
Debbie, I'm petitioning to do a part 3. We've probably another 10, 15 sculptures that are still there, north and west of where we were. So let's see if that happens. I hope so.
Okay. Well, we're working on a lot of really great ideas, and someone said, wow, we have a lot of depth of knowledge. And I have to admit, between Franklin and I think we'll never run out of content. So don't you worry. And
there's no shortage of content.
No. And the other thing is, I have to say, we learn a lot from you, because there have been times, there have been times that people put comments on, and it encourages us to do more research, and we really do learn a lot, and then we add it. So every lecture really is a little different, because we keep adding to it as we're learning, and we love it, and we love that you love it.
And we love to learn this material. I mean, this is what we do. We do this, yes, at some point we get paid for it, but we do a lot of this out of the love of it. And it's not something you really can quantify and say, it has put it in pragmatic terms. It's more the spirit of enriching your whole existence with. You have a place like Central Park to go to. Isn't it nice to know that there's something there that has some enduring meaning? And that's what we look at when we're looking at art, something that's going to really help us in a way understand ourselves better and understand where we are and what our context is, and what the aspirations of humanity have been. And yes, you do, they fall short more often than not, but they're definitely great things that people aspire to, and a lot of them are embodied in art.
And thank you all very much for enjoying this virtually with us. It's new territory for everyone. And I hope that you've enjoyed the way that we're presenting it. Thank you to Jeffrey and to Franklin. And, it was a lot of hard work to get us to this point. So thank you for appreciating it.
And thank you all for being the audience.
Yes.
Thank you all for your attention and spending all this time with us.
I think we're saying goodbye forever. So let's just end it, say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.